Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Terrace Talk, the Norwich City show, where we get the opposition perspective going into games. And this week, of course, it is Middlesbrough at Carrow Road. So I'm delighted to be joined by Tom at the Boro Breakdown podcast. A really interesting start to the season, I think, probably for both sides, but particularly for Middlesbrough, who maybe people weren't expecting to do quite as well as they had in the last few years. Probably quite a lot of people had them in and around the playoff places, but they've won their first two championship games quite convincingly as well. A 3-0 win at Millwall last time out. And it's been a very positive start, but we'll get into all of that. First of all, Tom, thanks very much for joining us. How are you?
All good here. Thanks for having me on.
Good, yeah, of course. Thanks for coming on. And, you know, as I mentioned, it's been a really good start to the season for Middlesbrough, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you say, it's maybe not one that a lot of people saw coming. In our preview show for the podcast, we all got a bit of flack for being a bit negative, and
Yeah.
I think compared to the last 2 or 3 years, you could probably look at it and think, yeah, we were, because last 2 or 3 years, and I think this goes for some neutrals as well. We do well in the transfer window, and like neutrals would be like, oh yeah, like Boro are going to finish like in the top 2,
Yeah.
and then ultimately we wouldn't start well and we'd fall well short of those expectations. I think I was the most optimistic on our preview show, and I think I went 9th or 10th, and I think everyone else went like 11th, 12th, 13th. So that's where we're kind of expecting, or we were expecting. Pre-season wasn't a lot to go off. We were quite slow in the transfer window. That pace has picked up now. But then, yeah, the start of the season has gone well. Obviously, 2 wins from 2 in the league. Less said about the Carabao Cup game, the better. But the Swansea game, 1-0 win. We looked a lot more solid at the back than last season. But at the same time, a little bit disjointed going forward. And then the Doncaster game was horrific. So going into last weekend, we were kind of looking at that thinking, yeah, we'll probably be on the other side of what the eventual scoreline was, but it does seem to be getting better. And we played some really good football at times in the second half, and it just seemed like it took maybe the halftime team talk for us to click. But yeah, ultimately 2-2, and everyone's got a little bit more optimism now, which I think we needed after, especially the back end of last season.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a confusing end to the season, I think, probably for a lot of people who maybe don't keep up with Middlesbrough so much, because as you mentioned, obviously it was a poor end to things results-wise, but a lot of people looked at Michael Carrick as a kind of promising young coach, and even though he hadn't been able to get Middlesbrough up in his first couple of seasons at the club, I think he'd impressed a lot of people with the football that Boro were playing, the direction that they were going in. So that's the view from kind of outside the bubble. Obviously, you've watched a lot more of the team than probably most people have. So tell us about sort of what your initial reactions were when the club got rid of him, and what the feeling was sort of in the fan base about that decision.
I'll be honest, my initial reaction was shock. But I think it was more to do with the timing of it. So the season finished, we didn't get playoffs, and the noises coming from the club, and this was kind of reported in the local media, were that they're undertaking a full review of everything, leaving no stone unturned. We had regressed in league position for the past 2 seasons. After in Carrick's first half a season, he got us into the playoffs. I think it was like 8th and then 10th. So, you know, we were going to undertake this review, and then it just seemed to go quiet for weeks. We'd announced friendlies, especially including one against Rangers, where the club had put something out on Twitter saying Michael Carrick takes the squad up to Ibrox. So everyone was just kind of looking at that thinking, that's it, confirmed, then Carrick is staying. And then I think it was like a week later, we just got the Twitter announcement saying the club's parted company with him, and Jonathan Woodgate and Graham Carrick have gone as well. And yeah, I just think a lot of people thought if it was going to happen, it would have happened a lot sooner than that.
Yeah.
I think in general the fan base were quite understanding of why it happened. I think there were times last season, especially in the second half of the season, where people did want Carrick gone, and that pressure was mounting. I think he had a lot of credit from that first half of the season, a lot of credit in the bank where he goes into the playoffs and played some really, really nice football. Ended the second season on a bit of a high, and it looked like, for all intents and purposes, we were going to carry that on to the third season and do a lot better, and we just didn't. So, yeah, he got let go, and I think a lot of people were just kind of like very understanding of it. And although they don't kind of wish him any like ill will or anything like that, like it's not that type of manager sacking. I think a lot of people were ready for a change at that point.
And what about Rob Edwards coming in? Have you been pleased with, first of all, his appointment, and then what he's kind of produced? Obviously, the results I don't think anyone could argue with, but in terms of the football, the communication style, what have you made of, first of all, his appointment, and then what he's delivered as head coach so far?
In terms of his appointment, I feel like a lot of people saw it coming. There's a bit of background there that before we hired Carrick, it did look very likely that we were going to be bringing Rob Edwards in. He has links to Kieran Scott, who obviously used to be at Norwich. So it looked like that was going to happen before Carrick, and then Carrick kind of came out of nowhere and got announced as the head coach. So when we started looking for a head coach again, and Rob Edwards was out of work, it just kind of seemed nailed on. And the club were putting stuff out saying we've had some very exciting international candidates and stuff like that. And everyone was just like, yeah, it's going to be Rob Edwards. And lo and behold, it was Rob Edwards. But when he's been announced and when he's came in, it has been like a breath of fresh air in terms of communications. If you watch any of Carrick's press conferences or any of his interviews or anything like that from his time in charge, you will find that he's one of these managers that doesn't give a lot away. You know, journalists would go in every week and ask for injury updates, and there were a lot of them in the last few years. And he just would not give a lot away on those. Whereas Rob Edwards, I literally just watched his press conference about an hour ago. He's getting asked about injuries, and he's like, you know, Daryl Lenihan coming back soon, maybe not this weekend. Riley McGree's maybe a few weeks behind him. Like, yeah, we're getting actual time scales and stuff. But other than that, it does seem like, you know, he's putting in a lot of effort in regards to trying to build a connection with the fans. He met with one of our fan groups, Red Faction, a few weeks ago, I think it was. At a pub somewhere in Middlesbrough, just kind of like talking about the season ahead and stuff. And when he came in, obviously the club did the interviews and stuff, but then there was also like a meet the staff event where he spoke, and then the couple of coaches that have been brought in as the coaching team, Adi Vivesh and Harry Watling were both there, and both spoke to the fans as well. So yeah, it does seem like a breath of fresh air in terms of communication, and then in terms of the football, you know, I think there's still a way to go, but you can see where he's identified that there's issues. You can see where we've made progress from last season. Just like I say, I think there has been a few times in the first few games where we've looked a little bit disjointed passing wise going forward. But it's hard to judge because of the small sample size. But the second half against Millwall, it looked like those problems were kind of put to rest. So, you know, hopefully for us that keeps going. But, you know, who knows? It's still very early.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if it does carry on at Carrow Road. But before we sort of come on to the game, I wanted to speak to you about someone you mentioned there, and that's Kieran Scott. He was obviously head of recruitment at Norwich under Stuart Webber, credited by a few people with the signings of the likes of Emi Buendia, Tamer Pukki, and kind of a golden era of Norwich City recruitment. So I think a lot of people were interested to see, you know, how he did in that sporting director role at Middlesbrough, and it looked like he had a pretty good start. Obviously, you've spoken about sort of Carrick at his peak at Middlesbrough. You know, some of the things that he did in his first 18 months at the club. And obviously Scott was the one who appointed him, took a chance on him. And I think he's done some good recruitment work, sort of looking at things from outside. But again, obviously you've seen most of it. So what have you made of his time in charge at Middlesbrough, and what's the feeling around him generally in the fan base?
I think the feeling around him is kind of mostly positive. You always get a few people whinging about it, and I think it's the people who don't necessarily like the new ways that things are done in football. And I know Norwich has had a really good kind of structure in terms of sporting director and recruitment and stuff for a while. Boro really haven't had that. We've had a lot of managerial stints where it's looked like the manager's kind of done everything, and then we brought Kieran Scott in, so it was a massive change in direction for us. He gets a bit of flack when we sell players, but I think it's more due to the fact that the club's trying to go in a kind of different direction.
Yeah.
Every club wants to emulate what Brighton and Brentford have done, so we've signed players, Emmanuel Latte-Olaf being a good example of it. Signed him for, I think it was 4.5 million from Atalanta, and then sold him for 20 plus million for to the MLS last season. So, with the job that Kieran Scott's done, I think you can tell that he's really good at buying these, working with the recruitment team to spot this talent, bring them in, coach them up, and then sell them on. I think he's looking like a patient negotiator at times, and I think that, especially this pre-season, it can give the fans a little bit of anxiety when it looks like the club isn't doing anything. But it's ultimately like we're going in with a price that we want to stick to, and then either we'll buy a player for a price we're happy with, or we won't sell until we're happy with the price. And maybe that's an area where the club before Kieran Scott didn't do so well. We've got a lot of cases where we've overpaid for players, and probably somewhere, we've sold players for less than we think they're worth as well. So overall, would say a good job, but that's only one part of his remit. The other part would be building a team that can challenge in the Championship, and we haven't seen the dividends from that pay off yet, but it seems to be going in the right direction.
Yeah, well, that was kind of going to be my next question, and looking forward now, as you said, the goal for Borough will be to try and get promoted and to compete at that end of the table again this season. Obviously, it's pretty much all been good so far, but if I can get you to sort of look into the crystal ball a little bit, how confident are you that will continue and that will end up being the case this season?
This season, I don't know. Like I say, we were all didn't have much in terms of expectations going into it, and I find it hard to kind of judge based off the first couple of games in the league. If we can keep going like we are, I don't see why we can't be in and around the top six. But winning 2 games on the bounce at the start of the season is actually our best start of a season in 31 years, which is crazy because I'm 32, so I've never seen a start like better than this, which is mad to me. But I wouldn't be surprised in the next kind of week and a half of the transfer window if we sign a couple of players out of nowhere that we maybe weren't expecting. I feel like the last 3 or 4 maybe windows, it seems to be a bit of a theme where things can go down to the wire. And last summer we ended up signing Ben Dork, who had a really, really good first half of the season for us before he got injured. This season, obviously earlier this week, we've just announced the sign of Nipan from Man City. I don't know if that's something anyone necessarily saw coming, but it is showing that these Premier League clubs will trust us with their kind of highly sought after young players, and look at us as a place that can be developed. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up having a good few signings in the next week and a half, and then come out of the transfer window, with a completely new sense of optimism about the season.
Yeah, it would definitely be interesting to follow sort of that deadline day. It feels like it might be quite an active one in the championship this summer. Looking forward to the weekend then. How do you look at a trip to Norwich? I think probably most Norwich fans would like to think that a lot of championship fans would see that as a tricky sort of away game. Obviously picked up a first win of the season or of the league season at least at Portsmouth last weekend. So how do you feel about that going into it as a Middlesbrough fan? What are your thoughts? And does it feel like the sort of game you want to be winning, or would you take a point? How do you feel about that?
I'd absolutely take a point.
Yeah,
Carrow Road's always one of the stadiums I kind of look out for and think that's going to be a difficult game. Saying that, I thought the same about the Den, and look what
yeah,
happened last week. But no, I mean, going into it, if we came out of that 0-0 or 1-1 or something like that, I couldn't argue with it at all. And it keeps the momentum going the start of this season. I'd obviously be delighted if we could go there and get a win, but I think that when we've played Norwich, it's always a tough game, and
mm,
what's sticking out for me is the one last season where really we should have won
yeah,
that.
yeah,
I think Tommy Conway missed a penalty to make it 4-1.
yeah.
I think at that point, and then it came back to be 3-3. I feel like I also remember another one, like childhood memory. This was on the radio, but I think we end up losing it 4-3 at Carrow Road. So that's
Yeah,
the tight.
I can remember
I
a
feel like
4-4.
Darren Huckabee might have scored
Yeah, that might have been the 4-4 I've got in my head. To be fair, there might have been a
4-4. Yeah.
4-3. Yeah, there you go. So if they can provide that much entertainment, then I'd be absolutely delighted. But I won't bank on it, to be honest. I am going to push you then for a score prediction. So how do you see it playing out on Saturday?
Well, I did. I was on the opposite side of one of these shows earlier in the
Yeah,
week. I was interviewing a guy called Matty Sokol for our opposition preview show. He went 2-2. I've went 1-1. I'm going to stick with 1-1, and that'll be my prediction for the weekend.
yeah, I think that's quite a good shout. It feels like sitting on the fence, but probably at this stage of the season, two good teams that I think will both want to be competing for promotion this season, and probably most fans, I'd say, will have them both in and around that playoff position. A bit of momentum on both sides. I don't think a 1-1 would be a terrible result for either side at all, to be honest. Tom, thanks very much for joining us. If people want
No worries.
to go and see more of your content, obviously you're over at the Boro Breakdown. So tell us about what people can watch and listen to going into the game.
Yeah, so like you said, we're at the Boro Breakdown on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. We have our weekly show every Sunday, where we'll dissect the game on Saturday usually. But then also we've got transfer sign and lowdowns. We've got opposition preview shows. Daft little bits of content, like we've done a couple of kit ranking videos this summer, which we've all had a lot of fun with. So yeah, we've got a lot on our YouTube channel to work through.
Good stuff. So yeah, if you haven't already done that, I'd recommend going to the Borough Breakdown for that. And of course, if you're a Norwich fan looking for some more content, we've got an offer currently on our subscription. So pinkham.com/subscribe, the place to go. I think it's £6 for 6 months. So fantastic value there if you believe my extremely biased opinion. So yeah, recommend that. Thanks for joining us, Tom. And of course, more content across our channels coming ahead of the Middlesbrough game on Saturday. See you soon.